Salam, Muzammal here from Wisdom in Nature. I've just finished a really heart-opening conversation interview with Sabnum Dharamsi that you're about to hear. And what I really appreciated and one of the reasons I reached out to Sabnum is that not only does she have a lived and professional experience around the inner world, around psychology, around Islamic psychology. She teaches in that field, and she has a recognized course and sees individuals privately, but also, as well as the inner world and the spiritual world and the emotional world, excuse me, she also has a real rich background in things like justice, in things like organizational conflict and cohesion and community and power. So she's engaged in outer change making and done so in a way that is persistent and with patience and doesn't just cover up the difficulties but also has a connection with something that's greater. And she has that lived experience and that professional experience with the inner world. So it was a real pleasure. The conversation was rich and went really smoothly and opened into territories that I think a lot of people who are involved, so if you're involved with change making or the inner world and are interested on the other side or straddle both, then you'll really appreciate the conversation and the themes that we touched on. And the initial theme we had called in our discussions prior was community, culture and justice, and how that maps on the Muslim communities or the Muslim psyche. So that was a kind of starting point. I hope you enjoy watching.
Great. So I'm really pleased to have Sabnum Dharamsi here on this Wisdom in Nature conversation. I'm Muzammal Hussain. I'm a representative of Wisdom in Nature and also engaged in therapy and other work. And Sabnum, first of all, welcome to this program.
Thank you so much, Muzammal, and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, great. Yeah. And we had bits of conversation in the lead up to this, and what kind of drew me to reaching out to you was already having seen an interview of yourself and Abdullah, and also looked at some of your writing, and kind of been, really drawn by your understanding and the way, your kind of appreciation of the nuances of life and of politics. And there's a kind of, even though you may not have articulated it directly, I sensed an understanding of diversity and, people's kind of rank in society and things like that. I think there was a lot of richness that just came through. That things aren't always completely clear, and it's okay. And I'd love for us to go a bit more into some of those themes, talking particularly about the Muslim community, the inner world, Islamic psychology, and so forth. But I'd like to just hear, maybe in relation to that, a bit about your background.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think you're right. I guess our work, you mentioned Abdullah, who's my husband and partner as well in this. But I would sort of say our work is very much a reflection of who we are, right? So we have pretty consciously moved away from a lot of mainstream things, I guess, and decided to set up our own business and practice with the intention that it would be a vehicle for being able to speak our own truths, if that doesn't sound too fancy, and hoping that, you know, it would pay our bills as well. So yeah, over the years, that's been a gradual process. And I mean, I think, you know, in terms of my professional background, I've worked in the mainstream, I've worked in mental health and public health, in counselling, and also in research and education. So it's been quite a span of different things, and consultancy, policy development. And so I'm interested in the whole kind of reach of things, how things work organizationally as well as individually. And in relation to diversity, I guess, being a person of color, I kind of, you can't, well, I feel like I can't ignore it. It's personal. But also, before we set up our Islamic counselling training, you know, and actually how Abdullah and I met, was really looking at diversity in different aspects, and wanting to incorporate that fully into our work, which was at the time was in the drugs field. And also then what we did was we set up, and it was actually the first, and I'm kind of proud of it, the first year-long course in, I don't know if we want to call it transcultural counselling, but we called it counselling in the context of racism. And it was specifically for Black and Asian students. And this was like way back, maybe in the early 90s, I would say to say, or maybe even earlier. Anyway, a long time ago. And that sort of, the sort of social justice ideas have really informed what, you know, what we're still interested in. And yeah. Great. So I don't know if that's the kind of background you meant. Or... It's
yeah, it gives something that we can explore further, and that's already your, you know, I'm getting that richness, and, you know, the idea of culture, race, and psychology, and kind of coming forward on that. I know your work shifted into Islamic counselling, Islamic psychology. And therefore, there's a sort of shift, I imagine, in terms of the people who you're more engaging with. That group is kind of evolved. The people you're directly engaging with, maybe in terms of clients, but also because you're teaching as well. So from that perspective, and I'd love for you to just share a bit about your experience with what you've described, and maybe anything else. And, you know, so race and culture, and how, you know, something about how you're bringing that into, or how that is coming in to the work you're doing in Islamic counselling, and the people who you're engaging with through that work.
I mean, I suppose, you know, I like, one of the ways to respond might be to speak very personally, which is that as a young adult, I had become very disillusioned with mainstream society, and with the way that I was being made to feel invisible, and the sense that whatever I did and however hard I tried, I couldn't achieve what the world seemed to be promising me that I could achieve. And I'd internalized some of that. And so I started reading around that, and that reading gave me an awareness, but it was empowering. And I think that's very true of many activists. that actually that reading or that connection with people suddenly gives voice, you know, to experiences that have been personally difficult. And then I met up with a group of people, and you know, we were all in discussion about these things, and you know, we wanted to contribute. We were full of passion and energy, and we wanted to be we wanted to make the world a better place, and we were full of intensity, both anger and love, I would sort of say. And
beautiful.
And that manifested in the work that we did, both in the mainstream as well as with our own communities. And in terms of working in the mainstream, I would sort of say at that time I was incredibly angry, and I kind of saw it as my job to unpack and I would say, in all honesty, to destroy white privilege. And I wanted to hurt people. I wanted to make people cry. I wanted to really push those truths home. And there was definitely a relationship between what was how I'd been disempowered personally and what I was teaching, and my sense of injustice and justice. And another thing that was going on, why we decided to set up that counselling in the context of racism, is because our experience, or my experience of counselling training, and Abdullah's had sort of different experiences in different ways, but one of my experiences of counselling training was that it was very devaluing of me on a very intimate level. It really got inside my head and heart, and I felt, continually that I was being failed in terms of my psyche, and that was quite damaging. So we wanted to create a space in which people of colour could come together and, be able to speak freely and explore freely issues around race without having to apologize or defend or be angry or all of those things. And what I think was really important was that in that space, people could be very explicit about issues around white privilege, but also it allowed us to and it felt like for the first time for many people, that we could just explore who we are and who we want to be and our vulnerabilities. And that felt incredibly precious, as well as the fact that we had students who would come on that course who would not have considered a mainstream course or would have easily dropped out. So that was incredibly, important. And then in terms of the drugs field, my speciality was working with young people, and Abdullah's was working with race. And, one of the discussions we were having at that time, the majority of clients were white heroin users. And the discussion in the drugs field was that, there aren't really women drug users, and there aren't drug users who are using other drugs, or if they are cocaine users, this is sort of, very wealthy people. And I'm being kind of like a bit brash about the way that I'm sort of saying what was the discussions that were happening in the drugs field, but it was kind of like, so we can ignore those people. The real difficult people and the real clients are these white heroin users, male heroin users that we're all seeing. And the services were set up in relation to them as well. And we felt that we intuitively felt, yes, there are Black and brown drug users, there are women drug users, there are users of drugs that don't fit into that established category. So we fought desperately to create spaces as well for those. And at the beginning, there weren't the numbers and there wasn't the understanding and there was a lot of criticism, blah, 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 blah. But we held out and we were supported by the organization we were in holding out, with a lot of challenges and fights and, all of that. But I see it, I look back and I sort of see it as being very much a kind of a younger version of me, exciting, thrilling, a lot of energy, working out like what's what, and, and absolutely committed to changing the world, externally focused.
And I can really, as you're speaking, really palpably feel the persistence of this younger you there, and the sort of fire, and the just staying on the road, on the path. Because when we want to do any sort of change in society that is attempting to remold, the outer norms, even if it's in specific spaces, even in a small group or something of people, the patience that we need, and the vision, and the setbacks that we have to face. Now, how we deal with that are all, kind of, that's part of the terrain. And your background's really interesting in that, you're working in terms of the changing the outer structures, with also a rich awareness of the inner world, and I'm pretty sure your own inner processes. And I'd love for you to speak a bit about, because we're also speaking here to people who are doing that. They're involved in outer change making, and there's an inner world that may not be spoken about of the activist or change maker, and so I'm not going to ask you for your top 3 tips, but feel free if you want to. But can you just speak to this activist or change maker, and what you've learned in terms of particularly the inner experiences you faced when you're up against odds and their setbacks, and also staying true to values as well at the same time. So I'd love for you to address that.
I mean, this is such a profound kind of question. I guess one of the things that I'm very grateful for was the opportunity to be with like-minded, like-hearted people. And even though we fought like crazy, and there were people in our group who, in our work group, who were sort of, for example, promoting the medical model, which we were really angry about. And there were people who, and we would fight about different hierarchies of oppression, like, is it worse to be Black, or is it worse to be a woman, or, on the whole intersectionality of it, without necessarily having the words for that. And we fought for all of those things with a passion, and we also muddled through. And I think those relationships were crucial, because we bonded through that fighting and argument, and we also understood how, we were all so committed.
And what sorry, carry on, but I want to throw in as well. What do you think, what do you feel in that experience? Was it, because it can go along different pathways. It can be that you bond, that it becomes a community glue almost, the heat, or it can be that people get frustrated and and they, they think it's not worth it, and they get a regular job, and that's, kind of get normalized and so on. And what were there any qualities that you could identify that were there? And I'm going to kind of name something that I heard at a permaculture gathering, where I can't remember the name of this woman, but she's quite involved with the development of intentional communities, of eco communities, and lives in one herself. And she said that one of the principles that they would have in their community would be, we don't run away from conflict, and so it's not a reason to escape, it's a reason to stay, and to face and to feel the discomfort and so on. And what was there anything you can identify in your group, in your organization, that led to that connection?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really big question, Muzammal, and I would sort of say that, personally, when I was coming to this group, there were lots of areas inside of me that were very frightened of conflict. And I desperately wanted to run away, many, many times, actually. And there were many times when I wanted to cry, and many times when I did cry. But I was also really angry, and I was very proud. I didn't want to be humiliated. And so there was an interaction between the personal and, what I was wanting to achieve. And I think what helped us all was a degree of honesty around all of that. So even though I'm saying this now with hindsight, I think that the whole situation was one in which, I think there was an implicit understanding that we all personally wanted to be empowered, and therefore we supported each other, whilst also being in conflict. And, there was a lot of love in that, and a sense of, us against the world, which was very bonding. And I think there was a reality to that. Because, the world was and is and can be a very difficult and damaging and hard place to be in when you're different. So there was a recognition, I think, of what we were giving to each other, and an appreciation.
Yeah.
Of that. I think that was really important, yeah, I mean, we used to joke about how there were ley lines kind of underneath the building, and, all of that. And I think, we also, I think we were also organizationally, we also were given a lot of freedom to work things out. And that was really helpful. I mean, partly because, it was a sort of very idealistic mission on the part of the sort of board of trustees.
Yeah.
But I think also they were a bit scared of us, and so they left us alone.
Yeah. A group that bonds through conflict, that is scary. to hierarchies.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and we had consultants coming in to help us with our conflict.
Oh, good.
And we destroyed them. We actually destroyed them because they were kind of coming in without an understanding of issues around diversity, and I guess that power and intensity and anger that we felt, we kind of lash out.
Yeah.
And so that was the out group. But I mean, going back to your question of what the tips are, I think also that I'm slightly looking back with rose-colored spectacles, but because there was difficult conflict that did not get resolved. There were things that made us separate. There were people who got lost along the way. You know, there were huge challenges that we were experiencing personally that kind of came into work. And I think part of what I'd say if I take off those rose-colored spectacles is that, you know, in the end, it actually was okay. In the end, I would sort of say, you know, maybe this is just my personal experience and what I see in Abdullah. I think that, you know, those experiences were sort of part of a bigger tapestry that we couldn't see at the time. And I guess my tip would be, you know, to understand that, you know, whatever you're doing in the moment is incredibly important, and it's your life and it's here and now, but it's also not the only thing that there is. You know, there is a bigger story going on that perhaps you're not seeing at that time. And that it's okay to kind of, you know, it's okay if somebody is so angry and walks out and there's a huge conflict and it destroys the whole organization even. You know, it happens, and you see these cycles over time. And I think it comes down to maybe, and this is perhaps where the spiritual aspect comes in, it comes down to, well, what is the actual project? What is the actual project? Is it that initiative that you've got going on at the time, or that value that you're trying to embody and fight for? Or is it the deeper process that is going on in your heart and that you want to manifest? You know, in other words, maybe the project is you and your consciousness and the opportunity that life gives in each moment and at each stage of your development. Yeah, I don't want to sound too kind of happy clappy, but I think there is a truth to that. Like, it's not actually about the thing maybe on the outside. It's
and you know, that truth, which is like, you know, conveyed through religious texts and through prophets and teachers and so on, is something we can grasp intellectually, or maybe we can grasp when we look back in time. You know, and then in the moment, you know, there's the reality of our experience and what we're feeling. And you touched on emotion, you know, you named anger and so forth. And you know, I don't know if now is the right moment, but I'd definitely like for us to sort of explore the experience of emotions and the kinds of emotions that we can experience, and I guess the cultural context, how we might frame those emotions and relate to them, because of whatever our conditioning is, and in particular, you know, within kind of Muslim cultural conditioning, you know, how that affects our relationship with our inner experiences, and yet what is Islamic spirituality, you know, or the Islamic counselling model in relation to that. You know, we're told, you know, don't get angry, and you were experiencing the emotion of anger, and I was on a call, on a panel a few months ago, where we were talking about the experience of hope and despair, and someone, this was with a Muslim audience online, and someone wrote in the chat box that despair is from the devil. And I'm just wondering, you know, your thoughts on these messages, because you must come across this sort of thing and a lot more. And what do we say to Muslims, or to anyone who's experiencing an emotion which in their conditioning, you know, where there's beliefs that they hold that this is something that you know, is from an evil source, or this is something that is negative, that they shouldn't be experiencing, that they shouldn't be expressing in some way, they should push down, and so forth. And you know, the reality of life is that we have so many experiences, and it's a, you know, as you use the word tapestry, there's a vast tapestry of inner experiences and emotions that we may feel. And I just like to hear a bit about yeah, how you would, what you might say to someone who's experiencing an emotion or a range of emotions that is perhaps overwhelming, and that they might feel they shouldn't be experiencing.
Yeah, I mean, if I can focus on what you sort of said about anger to start with. You know, you, as you sort of said, like a lot of our teachings which speak about, you know, not getting angry, and I find that you know, many of my clients are very frightened of being angry because of that. They've been conditioned that it's wrong. But the consequence of that means that they're not able to access the strength and empowerment that anger can give. And often with clients, they have been victimized by the anger of bullies or abusers or people in powerful positions who've used that, you know, kind of quietist attitude to damage further that person, that client. And then also that client then oppresses themselves. You know, they experience an internalized oppression. Well, I'm not allowed, I should be quiet. And the way that I work with people is I give permission for that anger, because there are a number of teachings in Islam that actually do allow for you to be angry. One is that, you know, you have to take care of your own heart and your own self. And, you know, we have very clear teachings that say that death is better than oppression, for example. That's, in other words, Allah is saying to us how serious oppression is. You know, because oppression kills your spirit, you know, so you need to fight to get out of that. And sometimes the way that you have to fight is not pretty, right? And also those teachings about not getting angry are in the context of people who would just let rip with their anger, you know, and who just allow themselves to kind of be damaging of other people because of their anger. So those messages are really for those people, you know, and, you know, we all have, I'm saying those people, but we all have those people inside of us in a way. We all have that potential to let our anger ride us. And in you know, Islamic teachings, this is really where those that speak around, you know, those kind of dangerous emotions. And we know that anger can be really dangerous. You know, you can get to allow yourself such rage that you actually lash out, maybe verbally, maybe physically, and hurt and destroy people and things. And that's where those teachings are sort of saying, you know, like, don't do that. Sit, you know, like if you're standing, sit down, you know.
Yeah. And I guess there's also, I mean, I know in my own work in the field where there's a distinction made between an emotion and behavior. And there's one thing is to lash out, or to be violent, and there's another to feel in the body the experience of an emotion. And I'm not sure that's often that kind of distinction is often appreciated within certainly my Muslim upbringing. And had it been, that would have been so liberating. It's actually fine to feel it in your body, to feel all these things. And that would have given me a more conscious relationship from the start. It's something I had to develop later in adult life. And it's still a journey, it's still a journey. And yeah, and so, yeah, it's that kind of distinction between behavior and the feeling of an emotion. And, I guess there's often a need for behavior as well, to take some action as well. Yeah, so I just wanted to bring that out, and if you want to sort of respond to that in any way, then
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Like, there is a distinction between what you feel in your body and behavior, but also, like, one of the exercises that I do with Islamic counselling students who are on training is to sort of ask, like, well, why does Allah give us emotions? Why have we been given them? They're absolutely crucial monitors and markers and developers, and they are what makes life rich. And I wouldn't want to be a person without anger. And I as I was sort of saying before, I know personally that time and time again, my anger's actually saved me from despair. And despair is horrible. Despair is horrible. It's the opposite of hope, right? And like I think one of the things about oppression is that it removes that voice that says you have a right to protest about things that are wrong. And there's all this sort of tone policing around, like, do it nicely, but it isn't nice.
Yeah.
What happened with George Floyd isn't nice. You can't do it nicely.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you have to rage, and you're supposed to rage about things that are wrong, especially when they're institutionalized in society.
Yeah.
Because when they're institutionalized in society, there's always this heavy weight that is saying to you, not just don't feel, but don't be. You're not supposed to be here in this, uneducated, unrefined state. You're being uncivilized. You're being, wrong. You're speaking too loudly. You're not being a good girl, or you're not being a good immigrant, or and there's so much risk attendant on that.
And there's what I'm hearing in that is also the dimension of power hierarchies and rank that I mean, in itself, just a strong emotion and how we communicate out of our inner uncomfortable experiences is something that, as a society globally, we're not very good at. We're like a baby that's just crawling or trying to crawl. And in a way, that there's a kind of disempowerment. How can we build alternative structures to the dominant ones when the kind of diverse landscape of our felt experiences and who we are is something that we're not very skilled at engaging with each other with. And so for me, as a kind of change maker / and attempting to straddle in the spiritual and both, there's a sort of necessary practice in how we can communicate, and things that are difficult and that we will mess up as well, and that's actually part of it. And then there's also, as I was kind of touching on just a moment ago, the idea of rank and power, that those who have power, they are comfortable, you know, things are okay for them because they hold the controls, and so it's very easy for them to be calm, and to look down at someone who's raging or feeling powerless and you know, kind of seemingly freaking out in despair. And it can look like otherworldly, you know, look, can't you calm down, you know? And there's a real blindness of that power, that it's often those who have power who don't see that gradient of power, that difference in power, as well. And also, I'm wondering in spiritual communities, and this is something I've noticed, that there can be a concentration of power, a hierarchy of power, and then there's also the need to be loving, you know. And my sort of witnessing of some of this is, and you know, I'm speaking both kind of Muslim communities and outside of that as well, but my sort of sense of some of the dynamics that can go on is that that there can be a kind of, you know, anything that isn't love isn't us, it's something else. And so there can be a kind of real kind of but subtle oppression, felt oppression that takes place, where with a lot of, on the surface you can have all these very spiritual looking practices and, you know, really soothing and heart opening, and then the politics underneath can be really messy and is hidden from view. And I'm wondering if, you know, if you could maybe, if you have something to say around that, and also what's a way forward, you know, if you found this experience, or are there examples where it's integrated, and particularly in Muslim spiritual communities?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, I feel quite emotional hearing you sort of speak to this. It's a really, it touches me deeply, because, you know, often the intentions with which we go into these places, spiritual places or groups, is very pure, and the initial experience is often one of full of light and hope and love. And then, you know, the experience as you continue is that, you know, you find that, like, there are these power hierarchies, there's corruptions, that the things that you left other things for are actually in the community that you've made your home. And I think that there's actually so many teachings in Islam around this, and actually in other spiritual paths. And I guess that in itself gives a lot of hope. You know, I would sort of say that, you know, the dunya, the nature of the world as we experience it in, you know, in all its relativity, as opposed to, you know, the absolute and the pure, is the place where we discover continually that things are not black and white, you know, and we have to understand and process all of that. And it does hurt, you know, and inevitably the thing that we invest and attach to, whether it's a group, you know, whether it's a spiritual group, a practice, a person, a sheikh, a guru, you know, a Thursday night dhikr, you know, a Sufi wonderful thing, a traditional place, you know, like a mosque full of beautiful whatever it is that we've become attached to. Allah says, we will test you by your own methods. You know, in other words, the thing that you've become attached to, you know, will eventually show up as something that isn't what you thought. And then, you know, in our prayer, if we can say, you know, Allahu Akbar, and genuinely hold our hands up and say, well, you know, that divine consciousness, that absolute oneness is greater than all of that, you know, and kind of have the humility to be able to put our hands up and say, I don't have a clue, you know, but the universe does, God does. You know, that allows in a way your heart to rest and to breathe and to understand that, you know, this is a process in which, you know, Allah has created us to make mistakes. And, you know, he says that, you know, if you're all perfect, I'd remove you and start again.
Yeah. And I guess there's something about how we embrace that imperfection that, you know, in process work, they use the term higher dream and lower dream, that when you start with a higher dream and then there's this sort of reality of things. And it also reminds me, I was reading about the Occupy movement and Occupy Wall Street. And so, you know, here, in fact, I think the book, I can't remember the exact name, but it was about Occupy Wall Street. And I did attend some of the Occupy gatherings, one in London and a couple in Brighton, where I live. And in this book on Occupy Wall Street, there was a real honest exploration of the movement and the lived experience. So Occupy was essentially a response to the economic system and the injustice of it. And yeah, it sort of was a movement that spread around the world. And people would gather and basically camp and occupy. You know, there was Occupy London, Occupy. You know, it was whatever cities and places. And so there was, I think, Occupy Wall Street. I don't know if that was the first one, but it was one of the most visible ones, kind of in the news that we got in the UK, apart from, you know, what was going on in England. And in that book, which was really fascinating, it's a brown book, I can't remember the exact name, but you know, there'd be a community of people camping, living together, facing hostility from the ruling powerful, from the police and so forth, and negotiating things. And you know, there were things like, we're going to have to clear the campsite for hygiene reasons. You know, it's health and safety. And so they thought, okay, so they got their broomsticks out and just cleaned the whole thing themselves, you know. So it was a real sort of, yeah, we've got power here, you know, and sort of movement. And this is described really well in the book, of all these challenges that they faced. And also the, you know, some of the, I was going to use the word hypocrisy, but maybe that's a strong word. Yeah, but you know, like they'd have to rely on, you know, sort of McDonald's for toilets and things like that, you know. So there was that aspect. But then there was also, what they were finding is that the way people would set up in camping, that they were mirroring the society outside, that those who were middle class tended to be, I don't know, in the north or south or whatever it was, and it also was mirroring New York, you know, sort of Manhattan, you know, and they're like, wow. So in a way, they were internalized, you know, they brought internally aspects of the system, the pathology of the system externally. And for me, that is like almost inevitable in any group or organization. And how we engage with that is then what sort of comes next. Now's the opportunity right within our lived experience right there for us to process this. So how do we kind of respond to that, you know? And I'm just sort of sharing that because, you know, I feel that there is a question there, and it's not like there's an answer, but a need for the acknowledgement of that question and a kind of response to that as well. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I think what you said is really interesting, and I don't think there's an answer. I think there's sort of There's profound understandings that can come from that. And I think what you've sort of said is it's inviting really a compassionate response to the kind of, you know, the ways that we've internalized our privilege, and the way that, you know, we also are going to reduplicate our conditioning, you know, which you know, depends on structures of power, oppressive structures of power. And I guess my thoughts are, and this is not to sort of say that the struggle shouldn't happen, but, you know, the world is not a perfect place. And, you know, we are going to die. We're going to find that en route to that the things that we thought were so true are not true. There's going to be information that's declassified that makes us realize that, you know, everything we were fighting for was like absurd. We're going to see how the people that we trusted were not trustworthy. All of those things that happen in groups are going to happen. But the struggle is real. The struggle is important. You know, we're going to die, and we need to die trying. You know, there is, you know, as the Prophet ﷺ, there is a jihad, or is a struggle on the outside, and there's also a struggle on the inside, which is greater. And, you know, we have in our being, you know, we've been touched by that light of God that means that we love pure justice and pure love and perfection. And, you know, the rest is wound. And that wound occurs on the inside and on the outside. So there's really no separation between what we experience on the outside and that we're fighting against, and also what we have on the inside. Though we would like to say we're on the side of good, and, you know, the rest are the enemy and the oppressor. It's actually, the reality is, it's so intertwined. And it can be helpful to separate. And there is a difference between the person who's bullied and the bullier. There is a difference between, you know, the sort of systems of Wall Street and the person who is struggling to make a living. There is for sure a difference. But we can't operate with a lack of humility or the rectitude, you know, of sort of smug rectitude. We have to be able to, I think, have a compassionate approach for our process and how that works. And I think that there are experiences that teach us that. So I think that what you're sort of saying, you know, is something which you've kind of saw at the time, and it's been written about. So that experience becomes yours, doesn't it? And, you know, I was speaking about mine, things that you begin to own and understand, and there's a wisdom in that.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I love what you're saying. Yeah, about the humility and that we don't know the bigger picture. That there's, you know, that we're going on limited information as well, and we're all, you know, we can all but try, but there's a softness in that as well, because, you know, of the humility that our response is coming from an understanding that is incomplete as well. And I speak also, in my own experience in groups, is that, you know, there's a time when you start to see the very things that you're sort of idealizing as being only outside of the group, you know, start to appear inside, and you know, but there's something about sort of staying with it, but also not, I guess for me, I guess where I threw in the idea of the question and the engaging with it is because for me, it doesn't feel right to accept it in the sense of, well, this is the way it is now. This is, it's okay for this to be normalized. And my own experience in groups is, and this is also a kind of going against the grain, is spaces where within the group there can be conversations, there can be feedback mechanisms, and I guess my work sort of straddles the social and the kind of non-human natural world. So I mean, I'd call it ecological. That I kind of lost my train of thought there now. What I was going to say, but okay, maybe it'll come back. So anyway, if you want to respond, yeah.
Yeah, like I think you're talking about like not normalizing or accepting the sort of the issues that are wrong, whilst at the same time probably staying in those conversations and challenging them. And I mean, my experience of that is that, it's, I can sort of say that in my communities or in my work, I have power, and I've kind of quote unquote become one of the elders, without realizing it. And, it's easy to become smug and to kind of shore up the system and sort of not admit that actually that there are issues, because now I'm comfortable, and I think like it's important to just be open about that and try and be honest, and and also like a little bit forgiving of oneself as well, that like now my friends and mates, we're all happy and we can sit around and talk spiritual chat. It doesn't mean that we are and that we're sorted, and that everybody else has got problems, just not us. It doesn't mean that. And just because I'm the one facilitating this work doesn't mean that I'm the expert. It means that I have responsibility. It means that I have accountability. It means that I need to keep checking if I've got something to offer, and if that's real, and if I have, also to come forward with it, because I think it's easy also to walk out and to become disenchanted, or to fall back on your traditional patterns, and I think I always find very resonating that thing of when you go on Hajj, that when you arrive in Mecca, you say, Labbaik Allah Labbaik, I'm here. And there you are, you're a pilgrim, you've got nothing, you've got nothing on pretty much, no stitches to hold you, nothing. And you're going to give in to the ecstasy of circling round the Kaaba, which is representing the idol-free place of your heart. And you just go into that ecstasy. And then, having melted into the ocean of kind of your utter non-existence, and that you don't matter as an ego, then you have to go to Medina and start building the society. And in the Quran, all the Medinan verses are messy, because they're telling you like, do this, don't do this, and there's always arguments for and against stuff. But but to actually go for it and build is important for our own hearts and our own spirituality, and and because we're relational, we're relational beings, ourselves are intertwined with otherness and interdependency, and giving and receiving in all its different facets. So I mean, I guess that process and conversations and just coming together is really precious to me.
Yeah, yeah, and so much in that, so much in what that means to come together. Yeah, there's, and you touched on Medina as well, and you know, there's forming society that existed there, and just like to touch on, you know, I guess particularly Muslim organizations and also decision making, and you know, I guess any organization that wants to really do something and exist in a way that isn't replicating the structures out there is going to look at decision making, is going to consider whether completely top down form of decision making is the way to go, which is often very simple, but can inhibit creativity, can stifle the soul, the more unconsciously that power is yielded, and the more rooted it is. I feel, you know, we can also use power to give up power and to share it, you know, and I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on where Muslim organizations, it's a general question, but where Muslim organizations are around decision making. And my own explorations, you know, I've come across different forms. There's often the term consensus is used when, you know, it's often not a real consensus. You know, there's a consensus that may be more voting and the majority, and there's a consensus that could be from just allowing the creativity and the wisdom to come through, and something that previously may have been unknown to form, while facilitating the power differences. So voices that may have otherwise been marginalized through the natural dynamics are really components and qualities that feed into what emerges from that. And I've had experiences of that kind of consensus, which is truly magical. And it's like there's a force, a presence in the room that's bigger than any one person. And I love it. I mean, I guess we had a process in our group where suddenly we landed on an option that nobody was anticipating. You know, and it's like, wow, you know, and it felt right, you know, for everyone. So I've had these sort of magical experiences that have really kind of shaped my sort of vision, and I guess my idealism in terms of what's possible if we let go of what we think should happen and let go of proposals, so we're truly kind of listening. And I mean, and I guess I'm plugged in, you know, with intentional community type paradigm and I would say anarchist organizations that are attempting to make decisions without hierarchy. Of course, there's always hierarchy. It's often unconscious, and yeah, just going back to the top-down leader, director, and so on model. And so, just speaking generally about Muslim organizations and attention to decision making and conscious decision making or unconscious decision making, and whether you'd like to say anything around where we are as a community or set of communities and decision making in our organizations.
Yeah. Should I? Well, let me have a rant then. I mean, yeah, I think that in terms of Muslim organizations, you know, we are generally a marginalized people in the structures that we have, and that sits within a context of having been marginalized. So I want to kind of put that out there first of all. You know, that the relationship we have with the mainstream is difficult and problematic to start with, especially in the context of Islamophobia and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Having said that, I think that in many of our organizations, we're very stuck because the minute we say Muslim, there is a kind of an implicit argument around how we need to be and how things need to be and what is Islamic. And that's a really difficult place to be, because there is an established idea around what is Islamic. There is a patriarchal idea around what is Islamic. There is a history of what is Islamic. And there are some more creative, modern, new, frightening, wild, maybe almost not Islamic ideas around how we are. And I think as a community, or as communities, we need to have those discussions. I think there is also lots of stuck places that we have that have been stuck because it's very difficult to have these conversations in the context of mainstream criticism. So, for example, around the relationship with women, and also around culture and prejudice, and like actually around decision making and power. So I think all these things are, there are some really interesting conversations beginning to happen. I think there is also the question of, I said it a little bit about when I said about what is Islamic, but there's also the sort of whole issue around who has authority, and is it the academics and the scholars? Is it the Sufis that have been co-opted? Who are the real Sufis? Is it the traditionalists? Is it the established organizations? Is it the new up and coming organizations that happen to tap into? There's all kinds of stuff. And I do actually take heart from that, because I think there's some really lovely, beautiful things that are being discussed now that haven't been discussed for a long time, that definitely weren't around when I was younger. I think there are some amazing people who are incredibly open and creative, and I think our teachings actually have so much to offer in this context. And so I'm interested in that. And I also am at a point in my life where I personally feel a bit more able to challenge some of the existing structures. So before, for example, if somebody had said, you can't be in this place because this is a space only for men, or you can't make this decision, or this isn't okay for you, or you're not wearing a hijab, you're not dressed correctly, your fingernails are too long, or whatever it is, I would have been completely destroyed by that. Or do you do this practice? Have you done this? Have you done that? Like all of that kind of stuff would have really disempowered me and excluded me. Whereas now I feel able to sort of say, why are we still talking about this? This is what I think is important. This is what I'm interested in. And this is where I want to put my energies. And actually we have incredible teachings around hypocrisy, around getting burnt out, around heart, around Pharaoh and the pharaonic systems, and around, these teachings as being revolutionary and liberation teachings and praxis, like, will you say what you do not do? All of that kind of thing, which is so like amazing and uplifting, and gives you a sense of like, here are some timeless revealed teachings that are not just about you and your own conditioning, but that actually go deeper. And maybe there's a part of us that is also timeless and deeper, and that can hear that, and that is intuitive, and that can kind of like you said, that those moments that come from nowhere, that aren't what you'd thought about, that You know, like as the Quran says, what, are you just going to follow what your fathers told you? In other words, are you going to just hold on to your established ways of thinking and your conditioning? Or are you going to like open your heart out? And sometimes that isn't, you know, it isn't what you think, or it isn't what's expected, or it isn't what's done before. But nor is it fitting into, you know, it can be a really decolonial process, if you like. It can, because this is a really different way of having epistemology, of knowledge, of understanding, you know, that is beyond ideas of rationality that have been so couched in an institutionalized system that has excluded the disenfranchised and the poor and people of color and women, you know, and I think there is that flavor, let's say, in our spiritual teachings, you know, that can be really inspiring and help you not to travel down already corrupted places.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. And I'd just like to end on asking you, you know, I love what you've shared and where our discussion has gone, where we've spoken both about the sort of outer structures, we've spoken a bit about just now organizations, and then also the inner world, and we maybe kind of started somewhat from that, and you know, often, you know, the reality also is that we experience the world through our inner experiences, and our inner experience is really the only reality we experience. And there's a lot to navigate at the moment, you know, where the world is, the pandemic, the biases, the prejudice, the violence, the ecological crisis, and so on, as well as just in our day-to-day lives. And the two are very connected, increasingly connected now. And so from the perspective of Muslims, you know, where you know, there's a Muslim, or there are Muslims who are feeling burdened by their inner experience and are looking for a way sort of forward, and based on the kind of work that you've been involved with and are actively engaged with, what would you say if they're considering where they go, and is it right to go? Are they a failure to go, or, you know, and get some sort of support or something? Do you want to just say a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's really important to be okay with knowing that we all need help. Probably all the time, but definitely from time to time. And, you know, I believe that if you find the right place for you, or the right person for you in terms of counseling, you can really get some support in a way that, you know, can move you in your life and pave the way for perhaps greater fulfillment, more activism, you know, whatever it is. And it distresses me that sometimes people wait a very long time because they are frightened, because they feel too vulnerable to speak to somebody, because they're worried about exposing themselves to somebody else, or even to their own selves, because they're worried about judgment, they're worried about confidentiality, and all those are genuine, real things. And I think that if you can really just take courage to take that step and find support, especially today in our very atomized and difficult world, it's really important. And find somebody who speaks to you and who you have a chemistry with. You know, the research sort of suggests that actually the model of counseling that you go for is not as important as the relationship that you form. So find somebody that you have a chemistry with. I am really absolutely dedicated to our model, because, having said that, because I think that different models have different implicit or explicit outcomes that they're looking for. And with ours, it's very much about understanding that there is a personal side to you, a political side to you, but foundational is a spiritual side to you, whether you're practicing or not, whether you're, religious or not, doesn't really matter. But there is an aspect of us which is profoundly connected to the absolute, to divine oneness, that has the capacity to just melt, that believes even whilst not believing, that hopes even when despairing. And having someone that is looking out for that for you is really special, So yeah, I mean, I would sort of say that, and I think this is, really important for people who are idealistic, who are activists, who are in this kind of process, because it's so easy for us to become burnt out, to be suicidal, actually, to get so disenchanted, to struggle with the relationships that are kind of forged in these passionate places, to lose friendships, to become very isolated and lonely, whilst finding community and gathering and bonding, and there's, so there's so many things, and yeah, so I really advocate that people do come forward, and also, just find any way that helps you, whatever that is, whatever that looks like, if it's not counselling, something else.
Wonderful. And do you want to just name the approach you mentioned that is yours?
Yeah, so I mean, we sort of set it up about 25 years ago, and we've called it Islamic counselling. There's other models now called Islamic counselling that are out there, but I would sort of say, I can just really speak about ours, which is that what I sort of said, which is that, it's not about imposing any religious ideas on anyone, but really about trying to listen out for the soul, for the spirit in people, and understanding that whatever we experience is part of a process of, inshallah, bringing us closer to our Lord, which is to be in tune with the universe and the way that we've been created, without pushing any of that onto anybody, but just listening. As therapists, we want to listen out for that, just as we listen out for feelings and emotions and social justice issues, also listening out for this, which I believe underpins the whole thing, that ocean of kind of oneness, of love, of justice, of truth, of meaning, of value, that we're kind of addicted to before we even start.
Yeah, beautiful. Great. What a note to end on. And yeah, Sabnum, it's been a real pleasure. My heart feels really open, and was opening as you were speaking today, and really deep gratitude for your sharing to myself and to the viewers, to the audience, and that the process also of our communication just felt so refreshing, let's say, and in the lead up to this, because we didn't really know each other before that, and so I just want to thank you for being open, and for your really real responsiveness to our correspondence, to our process in the lead up to this as well. So wonderful to have you on.
Thank you so much, Muzammal. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's actually so nice to speak with you and to be in conversation. Like you said, we we haven't really known each other, so it's just felt really, I think it's such a gift to be able to be authentic, you know, be that in relationship is so precious.
Yeah.
You know, so I really appreciate that. And yeah, and I think yeah, just all those sort of inner kind of crimes of ego, I guess, that we all have.
Mm.
You know, it's so nice to be able to kind of really just, and a relief to sort of kind of speak about how they manifest personally, and
own up to them.
yeah, and to be able to do it just in this chilled out way is really nice.
Wonderful, great. So I hope we see you again in some medium or another, and I look forward to further engagement with you in the future. Thank you, Sabnum.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Great.